So good evening, everyone. My name is Natalia, and I'm the head of international development at LPEA. And as you know, we launched a series of HR webinars dedicated to career opportunities in Luxembourg, and particularly in private equity, because we would like to guide a young generation through the hiring process and demystify Luxembourg, and show it as a good place to find a dream job. And while everyone is joining, I would like to say a little bit more. So we had our first webinar a couple of weeks ago with a hiring firm, which is Anderson Wise, and it was a more general webinar. And today we're gonna get into more details with global investing firm EQT and our guest Nicholas Curwen, who will represent this firm. Hello, Nicholas.
Good evening.
Good evening. Yes, so I will let you introduce yourself because I am sure you can do it better than I am. So if you can briefly say why you moved to Luxembourg and what do you do in EQT, what's your role?
So the quick answer is I wasn't given the choice. I was actually born in Luxembourg, but I did escape for a few years after school. I studied abroad. I came back to Luxembourg, then I actually left Luxembourg again in 2005, went to the UK, went to Ireland, and came back to Luxembourg in 2012. I joined EQT coming up to 2.5 years ago, the beginning of 2018, and I'm part of what we call the Fund Operations Management Team. We are fundamentally responsible for all of the fund operational aspects within EQT, and more specifically, we look after the 4 fund centers that we have today, which are Guernsey, the UK, Holland, and Luxembourg. In all the onshore European ones, we have a AIFM under the AIFMD, but Luxembourg, since the last 3 years, is now our center where all new funds are being launched, and pretty much every business line is now represented. So the critical mass is really Luxembourg, and that was part of a strategic decision to try and stratify the way we were launching and setting up funds. I'm specifically responsible today for the credit and public value business lines, as well as the fund control function within fund operations. That said, EQT is I mean, I think as probably most of you know, is one of the larger asset managers within the alternative space. High level figures, maybe just give some concept what we're talking about. We've raised more than 62 billion euros of capital since inception. We currently have an AUM, or what we describe as a fee generating AUM, of 40 billion euros across 19 active funds and 3 business segments being private capital. Private capital includes our buyout funds, our mid-market funds, our ventures, and includes also our public value fund. Real assets, which is focused on infrastructure and real estate, and then our credit business line, which has a senior private debt line, a direct lending, as well as a distressed debt credit opportunities number of fund. And EQT as a whole, maybe just to give some concept, is some 700 plus employees across 16 different countries, nearly 20 offices. And of those 700 employees, approximately 160 plus 170 operate within what we call central functions. So that would be support functions, non-direct deal focused part of the business.
Thank you very much for your introduction. And now I can see that most people finally joined, and I would like to remind you that we will, you can always put your questions in Q&A section or in the chat, because we would like to make sure that all information that we provide is useful for you. So if there is something you would like us to discuss, or if you would like to ask something, please make sure you put your questions in Q&A section. And meanwhile, we will continue. So, Nicholas, I think what people worry the most about at the moment is, of course, the COVID crisis and the impact of this pandemic to the job market. So I think what most people would like to know is, are you still hiring, and did this pandemic affect your job opportunities at your company?
The quick answer is we are still hiring, but I will caveat that. We are definitely more constrained. You know, as a business, we're actually relatively fortunate with having closed-ended funds. We have very stable revenues as a business, and that protects us compared to maybe funds that are completely, should we say, based on revenue with variable AUM within their funds. That being said, we also have seen a reduction in activity, so a reduction in M&A, and hence a reduction in overall investment and potential exit activity, reducing probably the overall workload that EQT sees as a whole. So we've actually been more focused on trying to redirect the capital we have across the group to areas that need the attention, and to use that approach to things. But that being said, we have hired people, and we've probably hired nearly, it depends a bit how you look at this, but we actually have brought 10 people onto the books in Luxembourg alone, albeit some of them were people that we had known before and had worked on temporary contracts before they joined as full-term contracts. So in short, we are hiring, but in a more commensurate and more measured approach, and cautious of what the future might bring.
And did you face any challenges in terms of finding resources lately, like in terms of new potential workers?
I think the only real challenge we've had is more about some people who've been concerned about whether this is the time to make a change. I think people have been concerned about, you know, what I would describe as better the devil you know, and knowing the organizations they might be in today, knowing as we enter a crisis, whether it's better to be somewhere you know than to join an element that's unknown. No matter how much due diligence you do on a new employer, you don't really know what it's like until the day you join. So I think that's probably been the main challenge, but overcoming that challenge has also been possible. And I think we've been able to reassure people that have been interested in having those conversations with us.
And what is your general expectation when you look for new people to join? What do you expect from them?
I mean, I think the number one thing that we really focus on is fit. Will they fit the EQT culture? And that goes from, you know, the more administrative jobs, be it some of the assistants, some of the receptionists, all the way up to the top of the house. Fit and our culture is one of our key drivers and one of the most important things we look at. So obviously you need to bring the technical skills to the job that you're applying for, but the cultural fit for us is paramount.
I mean, are there some peculiarities in your job which maybe young professionals don't even expect when they apply for a job?
I think that's a bit hard to tell, because it depends on the different expectations. I think we see people who may come from very large institutions that need to adapt to our culture, probably more than younger people who are a little bit, should we say, less molded in the way that they've been and are more open to a new culture. But that being said, you know, the important thing is also to be aware of our values. And that means that we are a high performance organization. We do expect people to take responsibility, but to be given freedom, but you are going to be expected to perform. We do look for people to be respectful, to provide integrity. We're expecting an entrepreneurial spirit, which means we want people to be innovative, to think about solution orientated, to have a sense of urgency in terms of delivery. And then we still want them to be able to adapt to our culture of informality and transparency. The informal element meaning that they should feel that they're encouraged to speak their mind and ultimately non-hierarchical. As long as you have a good idea, you should be able to go to the most senior person that's the right person to discuss that idea. And I have some examples we can dig into if you want at a certain point. And we do look for people to really be transparent, open and honest. I think one of the things we describe it is we can pretty much fix most problems except the ones we don't know about.
Yeah, sure. And when you interview people, do you, first of all, I would like to know if you currently do it online, or also, I know that many companies, when they hire people, they do some kind of psychological tests, or there are a bunch of, depending on a country and on a company, there is a huge variety of things like that. So do you do something of that kind?
So our interviewing is usually face-to-face where possible. Obviously, in the last couple of months, that's not been possible, and we have done video conference interviewing. We have a couple of new hires starting next week that have basically gone through the full process digitally. I think it's actually been pretty successful, albeit maybe just has lacked that human touch. And I'm pretty happy that the onboarding can happen in a more face-to-face environment, because I think it's probably been quite difficult to start a job, not leave your house, maybe get sent a laptop and not really know where to start. So I think that onboarding that we're doing within the offices will actually be easier than it would have been in a digital environment. But that being said, we had a plan to address that. In terms of our interviewing process, we are very much a consensus-based organization. So people will go through a number of interviews. We also do like to have what I would call different characters within our organization, people that look at it through different angles and bring different views as to how they may fit in to them and relative to their roles. I mean, I'll give you an example that when I was interviewed by people that were going to be reporting directly to me. And that was a first for me. And then we do have what's called a NEO test, which ultimately does give us a profile. This isn't so much for us to assess whether there's a problem. It's more just to give us a benchmark of, does this reflect and show the individual that we felt we have met? Has it raised a potential concern that we felt maybe we'd overlooked? But that's effectively our process.
Like when you interview people, is there something that's important, like personally for you, something that you are looking for, to find in them, some qualities that you think are important, that you personally?
Personally, me personally, I like honesty, and I like a sense of what I would call not a textbook answer. I mean, we've all heard the question of, why should I hire you? Or what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And we've all prepared for interviews, which is understandable. But I'm looking for something authentic, and I'm looking for something honest. I want to get to know the individual, and that goes back to culture. Understanding how we as an organization operate and wanting that honesty and transparency means that we want someone that shows that also in the interview.
And I'm sure there are some things which can alert you when you talk to people.
There probably are. I mean, it depends a lot. I think it does boil down to the individuals. I mean, I've probably seen everything in my career interviewing people across the board. I've seen people literally walk into an interview 10 minutes later, just say, stop it, this isn't working, and decide to walk out of the interview. I didn't think I was that scary that time, but as I said, I have witnessed those sort of really crash and burn interviews. But I think anything that feels to me that either I'm not getting the full answer, anything that feels to me that there's maybe a sort of skirting around the topic, or potentially even just not answering the question, is generally signs that I would pick up on and try and dig in a bit more. And it goes back to looking for that honest and transparent. We're all human. We all come with a baggage of experiences, and it's those experiences we want to understand.
And how important is French, the knowledge of French language or English language? Because, from one point of view, Luxembourg is quite an international place. We have so many people from all around the world here. But at the same time, it often happens that people are looking for someone who for sure knows French or German or even Luxembourgish. So how important is that?
I think it depends a little bit on the role, but it will always be an extra asset. We do operate primarily in English, but let's not forget that Luxembourg The official laws are written in French. The official CSSF circulars are published in French. If there's any issue between the translations, it's the French one that dominates. So that's always going to bring an extra asset to it, because there will be times that we're interacting. But that being said, we have a very diverse group of languages within our group, and we probably pretty much have someone who can speak any of the languages that you could come across in Luxembourg. So I think the basis is always going to be English, because we primarily operate in English. To be frank, Swedish would be an advantage, because the mothership is Swedish and we are a Swedish group. But French is always going to be an asset, but not necessarily a strict requirement. And I would say the same for German as well. Sorry, I didn't cover that as well.
I see. And I have another question for you in terms of, let's say a person had a break between leaving the old job and looking for another one. I'm asking because I actually faced this situation myself, because I decided to take a break from work. And when I was writing my CV, I was very concerned, like that there might be a question like, what did you do for like all this time? So like these little details, is it important for you, or like would you not really pay attention to that?
I would be more focused on understanding what the individual did in that time and what they took out of it. I think we all understand that life happens. Sometimes that means that we end up in a situation where we may not have a job for a small period of time. It may end up in a situation where personal circumstances drive us to not be able to take a job. And I've interviewed many people who've had some form of career break. I'm the first to put my hand up. I'd be a hypocrite if I had any issue with it. I took a break early on in my career and spent some time in the mountains. It was much more fun than being sat at a desk when I was mid-20s. But that being said, I think it's more about the experience and the lessons learned and what someone's taken out of that experience. I'm never going to judge someone either for what I would describe as falling down. We all fall down. I jokingly say the only reason that we're able to get up and walk out and have a shower in the morning is because as toddlers we fell over. We learn by falling over. So if someone can at least show me that when they had landed on unfortunate times, they've learned from it and they've grown from that experience, there'll be no judgment from my side in any way. As I said, I think it really depends about the context, being transparent and honest about why, and showing me that there was an experience that was taken out of that.
And I'm also interested in, private equity is quite a specific sector. And is it common that you hire like newly graduates? Or is it usually, do you usually hire people who have already some kind of experience in this field or in finance?
Most of the people we hire come with some kind of professional experience. So we hire, if I look really specifically in Luxembourg, and don't forget the investment teams sit around the world and is subtly different, but I think that thematically we rarely hire directly from school. In Luxembourg, we hire people who have legal background, who have accountancy backgrounds, whether it's audit or fund administration. So we do look usually for someone who has maybe a couple of years experience. And we hire people, across that range. I think the most junior people we have hired in Luxembourg probably come with 1 to 2 years experience, prior experience. The most senior probably come with 20 years prior experience, depending a bit on the role. But in short, we rarely recruit directly from schools and universities. I think the same, if you think about how our investment teams operate, and it's a little bit out of the realm of Luxembourg per se, but we also usually hire from banks, from consultants, so people, again, that are bringing some experience to the table.
Okay, and in terms of education, how important are big names in your CV? Like, let's say Cambridge or Oxford, or does it really matter? And do you pay attention to additional courses that the person took?
I think And again, I'll give myself as an experience. I turned down my dad's great dream of me going to Cambridge like he did because they didn't have the course I wanted. That being said, I think obviously there will be some assessment of what was learned at university, but I think we still take an approach of what was learned out of it. I think it goes back to the culture. As long as you have the basics that we need to be able to develop you and the cultural fit, we're more likely to take a bet on you than if you just tick the technical side but don't have the cultural fit.
And do you have internships?
At the moment, we have not had any internships. I think it's something I would like to explore a bit, but it's not always the easiest to accommodate from a timing perspective and from some of the work that we have to do.
And also, I'm interested in when you have employees, do you encourage them to take additional education courses while they're working at EQT?
Yeah, we probably do one of two things. We see people who will do maybe professional qualifications on the side, things like CAIA or ACCA, and we'll support them in that. And we also have something called the EQT Academy, which provides a number of tailored courses for EQT employees, and is usually some form of in-house built training focused on development areas that we want for these individuals, that they will go on anything from every 2 to 3 years, probably one course. It could be an introduction to people management, it could be around communication, but we have that internal academy that also supports it. So we support both internal development as well as external development of certain kind.
And here comes my favorite question about etiquette, because it happened to me that I met people who had a very good CV and very good background, but when I met them, they turned out to be quite, they had some inappropriate language. They used inappropriate language, or let's say, did not behave like they're supposed to. So how important is that for you? Like this, yes, the etiquette at work.
So one of our core values, as I explained before, is respectfulness. And hence, for me, if you are not able to present and communicate in a respectful manner, you're going to fall short on that value. So for us, that kind of ability to hold yourself properly in the context that you're with and the people that you're with is key, and is one of our core values.
All right, and I also know that EQT is standing for diversity, and as you know, we also have an initiative which is private equity for women. So my next question to you is that how do you make sure that you hire enough women for your team, and how important is that for EQT?
It's hugely important. Let me give you a couple of examples. Starting at the very top, there are initiatives to ensure that the compensation structure for people, hiring managers, considers and has clear targets around gender balance. So that's a key initiative, absolutely. Secondly, we have an in-house network called Women, which is effectively the women's internal network, which is about allowing women within EQT to network and meet each other and develop around that. And then we have a mentoring scheme around this. And to give you an idea, going back to what I talked about informality, this was the brainchild of two women up in Stockholm who were discussing the fact that they felt they didn't have a forum where they could develop their skills, get to meet other women within EQT and voice some of their concerns potentially. And this individual, the two individuals in question, went into one of the members, a senior member of management in Stockholm, and laid forth their idea. They came forth with a clear idea, clear reason why they wanted it, and it's now become something that was effectively presented directly as one of the key topics on our all investor meeting 2 days ago, where this individual was actually on stage, albeit it was digital these days because of the circumstances we're living under, but she was on stage presenting how we've addressed this issue and the issue of gender balance. So we have the compensation, we have clear goals and targets around how to hire, and diversity is absolutely something we seek not only because we think it's the right thing to do, but it also we have clear evidence that it probably creates better performance.
Well, maybe you can
Get
also
the word properly, sorry, does create better performance.
Maybe you can be a mentor in our mentoring program for in private equity for women, because we also match mentors and mentees. So you can participate if you would like to. And another question about diversity, which was actually raised by one of the attendees last time, is about, so we have so many foreigners here in Luxembourg, and it is important to bring new talents here. But at the same time, there are people, local people from, let's say, European Union, who are worried that in some countries, people from some countries, they might have a different approach to work in terms of work and life balance, and maybe their salary can be lower than the salary of a European person. And like some people are concerned that companies prefer to hire some these kind of people instead. And how have you ever faced this problem? And yes.
No, we definitely try and ensure that the value the individual brings to the table is recognized. I think it is a theme that's going to become interesting. I mean, just to give you an example, I think it was both Facebook and Twitter that announced during this work from home COVID-19 scenario that they would allow people to do this full time. But Facebook also has announced that if you do this and say relocate, so you suddenly decide that you want to go and live in Thailand because the beach is nicer, they'll be fine, but they'll adapt your salary to where you're living. So there is a reality that we're living in a much more globalized world, and potentially even more globalized and less borders with the digital, you know, the proof of the digital working from home that we've had for the last 2 months or so. That being said, I think we're much more focused on the job that the person does and the value that they bring. Within Luxembourg, just to give you some numbers, we have 20 nationalities out of 38 people. So there's no more than pretty much 2 people of every nationality. We do focus on diversity, but we don't look to use diversity as say, an excuse, right? We're looking for the best people within that, and the people that bring the best to us as a whole and fit in the best with us.
Okay, and now I will read you a couple of questions from Q&A section. So one of the people attending is asking, is it common for Luxembourg companies to hire someone who is native English speaker and then encourage them to learn French as a second language?
I don't know if I can say whether it's common. But I think there are definitely a large number of companies that will support language development skills. It's probably a bit up to each company in Luxembourg to do that. We would happily support it if there was a business rationale. I think the real challenge is whether there is truly a business rationale to learn French in our environment. As I said, the advantage it brings is that some of the laws, some of the circulars in their most accurate form are the French version. But the reality is that we also have got enough French speakers. So as I said, in our case, we would consider it. I think most companies should consider it, but I can't really tell you what the norm is out there across the average company in Luxembourg.
And we also have a question about, oh, sorry, I lost it. Excuse me. So do you consider working in private equity business administration as a good preparation for a long career? Or might it be too much tailored to industry implicating restrictions later on?
Tough question. I mean, the way I see this is, I think anyone who's working for a manager, whether it's a private equity manager or a hedge fund or even a mutual fund manager in the UCITS world, needs to realize that the manager's view of the world can sometimes be narrow. Whereas if you're working for a fund administrator and you have 100 different managers as clients, you'll realize that there is maybe 100 ways of doing the same thing, and you might actually get a broader view of the topic. So I think you have to, it's more about thinking about where you sit within the overall industry and how that benefits you. I'm definitely a strong believer that the more your foundation is broad, the more you can really decide what is the area you want to focus on. And sometimes starting too focused may limit you, or you may only find later. But that being said, I think, you know, PE brings other things to it that are always going to benefit. Understanding how a PE firm operates, understanding what a PE firm does, how it manages its investments, how it buys companies, adds value to them, and ultimately exits those positions, will never stand you, will never stand you in bad stead, as it were. It would always be a good experience, a good business experience. And then I think the last thing is, it also depends a little bit, you know, does anyone really know where their career will go to? Most of us have ideas of where we'd like to get to, but the real action that I think defines your career is whether you seize the opportunities when they present themselves, and whether you're prepared to go for them when they present themselves. So I think in terms of a long career, it's more about focusing on what you can learn today, what you can learn in the role that you have, considering the opportunity that may present itself to you, what you'll be able to learn from that opportunity. Will it add to what you have today? Will it just repeat what you've already learned?
Thank you. And let's move to another question from Alistair. Could you please describe EQT's approach to performance management and employee appraisals, and approach to career development?
Absolutely. As I said, we have the EQT Academy, which is there effectively for the really good performers and the ones we want to invest with over time. We have a classic, in inverted commas, performance process, whereby we have a year-end process, we have a mid-year review process. That is a discussion between employees and their manager. But in both of those processes, we have what we probably call a 360 review process, whereby, for example, on Monday, for all of my direct reports, I went into the system, having agreed with them who we were going to get feedback on for the mid-year review. We've gone out and asked for feedback with those people. It may be direct peers of theirs. It may be people that they work with in other areas. It may be more senior, more junior, but we try and go for that 360 feedback and try and then use that as a good development. In terms of career development, again, it's about trying to work with the individual, understand where they want. Are they prepared to take the opportunities that present themselves, and take it from there? You know, if I look at the people who've been successful within EQT, they have been prepared to pack bags and up and go somewhere else. One of my colleagues is now based in Luxembourg, was originally in our Guernsey office, which has now got effectively a small handful of funds that are in very much the tail end of their life. He didn't foresee that when he joined EQT. One of my other peers has recently moved to Stockholm. We look at secondments where we can. And then overall, we also have an engagement process where on a monthly basis, we go out to all employees and ask them in terms of satisfaction, a number of questions around their work environment, and ask for their direct feedback on what they think could be better. So in that whole process, it's really a feedback loop to try and understand where people are at and understand where we can work with them to develop them, and then where to invest in that process.
I see. And then we have an interesting question. I like this. Nicholas, how do you personally react to a person who comes with an idea that is pure business environment disruption? Are you looking into it proactively, or wait for what happens to send to your bosses?
A bit hard to answer, because I think it probably depends a bit on what it is. You know, as humans, we don't like change, and yet change is the only constant I can guarantee to anyone. I haven't seen the full list of who's on here, but I can tell everyone on here that change will happen. But I think we as an organization embrace disruption and embrace change. We are very dynamic. As I said, it's a high performance environment. So we will generally be very happy to engage in those ideas and to try and look at what we can do to disrupt ourselves. We live by a sort of unwritten mantra that everything can be improved at all times. And the only way to do that is engage in discussions around business environment disruption, whatever it may be.
And Nicholas, I know it's difficult to make projections at the moment, but do you think that you can still continue to hire people in the same, not quantities, but in the same way as before COVID?
I think it will depend more on how we as an organization grow. We're absolutely focused on growing, and that's one of our key ambitions, but we also want to grow with the underlying, at least within the support functions of scalability. So there is an ambition to grow, there's a target to grow, but I think that you'll see that the growth we've had specifically in Luxembourg will be more tempered to what it was. I think we've nearly doubled in headcount. We're just under 40 people, I think 38 officially in Luxembourg today. We were closer to 20 when I joined. I think as an organization, we have probably doubled in the last, I'm going to say 4 years as a whole, but there's a significant chunk of people that have been with us for less than 2-3 years, and that's the organization as a whole. But that growth needs to become a little bit more scalable. That being said, obviously there will be outside factors that we can't control. We've absolutely curbed our recruitment this year. We haven't stopped it. I think the way I would describe it is we've not put our foot on the brake, but we've taken our foot off the accelerator, considering COVID. But we are still recruiting, and we will be looking to continue to recruit at the right levels as we grow.
Thank you, Nicholas. I think I probably we answered all the questions. I just would like to remind everyone that we usually send a little survey after the session where you can express your wishes and also share your comments about the session, because we make these webinars for you. So in order to give you useful information about Luxembourg and about jobs in Luxembourg. So please, if you have 2 minutes to complete the survey, it will make us very happy, because we will be able to produce relevant content for you. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you, Nicholas, for your time today. I hope you can become a mentor for one of women in private equity in Luxembourg.
As I said, I'd be more than happy to. I'm glad I've been able to share my insights. I hope we've answered everyone's questions. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.